Jason.
Did the T-Rex say
Jason?
Live alive. And yes, that is how I will be pronouncing it for the duration of this video. And if you don't like that, then I don't like you, my friend. It has received increased attention lately because in 1 month's time, it's gonna get remade with fancy HD Octopath Traveler graphics, and it looks incredible. I'm not gonna lie, it looks incredible. This is the video game that Square Enix made
Squaresoft.
after Final Fantasy VI, but before Chrono Trigger. It was the game sandwiched between those two legends, and it never came out anywhere other than Japan. The credited designer would go on to direct Mother 3. The credited director would go on to direct Chrono Trigger. The guy who made Undertale wears its inspiration on his sleeve. Live Alive has some lofty standards to live up to. It's got the forbidden fruit syndrome of never coming out anywhere other than Japan. So people that are hipsters pretend to like it. It's got a 10 out of 10 concept with these different anthologies going on at the same time. Well, maybe not at the same time. You can pick anyone you want to do. It's like if Mega Man was a JRPG, you could pick what order you want to do the stories in. And then they all come together into this one amazing thing. It's a great concept. It's a 10 out of 10 wonderful concept. And I bet a lot of you are excited to play the remake, whether or not you've played the original or not. Oh, spoiler warning, by the way. So consider this your spoiler warning. If you're gonna play the remake in a month, maybe click out of the video now. Actually, you know what? I'll do the tier list. I'll do the tier list right now. With a heavy heart, it pains me to say this. Live Alive is just good. It's not a masterpiece. It's just good. All right, so full stop, spoilers. Spoilers start here. I'm gonna talk about the whole game right now. So you're given a choice between 7 different scenarios represented by their main characters. They aren't connected, and what order you do them will not change any events in subsequent choices. They're all completely self-contained, complete with their own opening and closing credits. I started with Ninja, and oh boy, what an introduction. First-time players, maybe stay away, probably you shouldn't follow my lead, because it is by far the most complicated and intricate one. Before you even lock in your choice, there's a little blurb explaining what this chapter is all about, and it poses a challenge. Can you kill 100 men? The women are tallied too, so I guess it should say people. Anyway, nitpick aside, despite this message, the game introduces stealth mechanics. There are no random battles, a fact that is as true about this segment as it is about all the others, for the most part. You need to actually get spotted by the guards or talk to somebody to engage in combat. Holding Y makes you invisible, so the game is funneling you towards maybe trying to avoid all possible encounters. But what about that message, can I kill 100 men? We're hit with this dichotomy. Do you try and murder all 100 people? Or try to sneak your way to the end? Sounds kind of familiar, huh? It's nowhere near as fleshed out as that certain other game, and this entire setup exposes a problem hovering over the entirety of Live Alive. Doing challenge runs like this is almost hard to justify. Because each chapter is independent, it's a tough sell to have a player go out of their way to do optional challenges because the carryover is so small. It won't affect any of the other chapters. Whatever I do here is essentially going to be self-contained. Doing these won't affect the ending, it won't affect what happens in any other chapter. In most games you do it for loot, for items, for weapons, things that you can carry with you for the rest of the game. But the chapter is just going to end and I'm no longer going to have access to any of this stuff. Once you're done with the ninja, we won't see him again until the final chapter. And the final chapter is just as short as all the other ones. So as a gamer, where does your motivation come from? If you're a self-motivated gamer, if you're the kind of person to squeeze everything, leave no part of the buffalo to waste, maybe you would run through this 3 times, pacifist genocide, and then the easiest route to do what I did, just ignore all of this and kill whoever gets in your way. From where I see it, what's the point? I'm gonna sit here and make the game more difficult or time consuming just so one of my 7 party members in the final chapters starts with better equipment? You can't even use all 7 in your party anyway. Also, this game never gets hard. You're never going to struggle through any fights. So power incentives like that hold no power over a practical-minded player. It's like, why take the winding path with the optional treasures when you can just walk straight to the end and get to the next chapter? Still, don't get me wrong, I had a difficult time here. Not in combat, but in navigation. There's traps, hidden doors, places you can string a rope across to create your own shortcuts, places where you can fall down and end up in new areas. This chapter took me 4 hours, 9 minutes to complete, which was the longest in the whole game, including the finale. You should chalk that up to it being the first one I picked and not really knowing what was going on or where to go or anything about it. If I were to replay it now after finishing the game, I could probably do it in about half the time, 2 hours flat. But all in all, it's an impressive start. Ninja is meaty enough to be its own standalone game, something not many of the other chapters can claim. In Live Alive, anytime an enemy is defeated, it always says, right on. All I can say is that the remake better keep this or there will be hell to pay. There will be hell to pay. I mean, like, whatcha, 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 whatcha. You see that? You see that, game developers? There will be hell to pay if it doesn't say right on. If it doesn't say right on after I beat enemies. If this were $5 on the eShop, it would be a pretty decent buy. The same absolutely cannot be said about my second choice, Fighter. It's supposed to be a send-up of Street Fighter 2. There's an opponent select, and fights, and that's it. No overworld, no exploration, one static menu, pick who you want to face, then one by one, you take them out. After the initial 6 opponents, there's a 7th against this guy named Masaru. Something every chapter shares is the combat system. Everything is turn and grid based. Most similar to, I don't know, a Nintendo Way of the Ninja? Or maybe the Mega Man Battle Network games, though I haven't played much of those, so maybe not. 7 battles. That's it. The chapter is 7 battles. There's not even really a story. You just train, you fight 7 people, and you're done. Ninja could have potentially had 100, and it's got all this stealth action going on. So the first 2 that I picked were the extremes. They were the most complicated and the least complicated, bar none. And it goes to show that not all chapters are created equal. Some are just dumb little fights that probably don't even need to be in the game because it doesn't add much of anything. After Fighter, I tried Kung Fu, which ended up being one of my favorites. You're an old Kung Fu master that has no kids, no family, nobody to remember him, nobody to pass his legacy on to. So he decides to take on pupils. You can divide this chapter up into thirds, and the first segment is to find your students. There's no choice or player agency. You'll always end up with the same 3. Next is the training, which is both annoying and cool. You fight your students a total of 16 times, which is grating having to do 16 of the same fight over and over and over again. It's up to you how to divvy up your training. Since 16 is not divisible by 3, it's impossible to keep it completely even. What's really cool though is that your students will learn whatever moves you use on them. Like if you use Bala Do Yi Bu Jayo, Bai Li Do Yi Bu Jayo on one of them enough times, then it'll become a part of their arsenal. After all this training, tragically 2 of your students will die, leaving only you and whomever you chose to train the most. Our last third is retaliation. You storm the enemy's hideout and with your dying breath claim your revenge, leaving your student as the new Kung Fu master. It even replaces the character sprite when you're selecting a chapter on the main menu. A brisk 1 hour and 40 minutes. This is how it's done. It's the most story-intensive one so far. It's told in an effective way, and I really enjoyed this one. Next was Caveman, and it's about mankind discovering the first woman, I think. I say I think because Caveman's gimmick is that people don't talk. They just kind of gesture or have thought bubbles with things inside of them. There's these two tribes of cavemen with their pet/working partner apes, but there's only one cave woman to go along these two tribes. It results in all-out warfare, with the final boss being a guy who turns into a T-Rex for some reason. Live Alive loves to tell its tales in ironic ways. The only love story is the one where nobody speaks. Fighter, despite it being called that, only has 7 fights. Which leads us to SciFi, perhaps the most ironic. The chapter with the most conflict has the least amount of combat, with only 1 fight, which takes place in a virtual space, so it's not even like a real fight, it's a computer fight. SciFi is almost all exploration and dialogue. Going from Caveman directly to SciFi made me feel like watching 2001. Both Caveman and SciFi took around 2 hours, though if you know exactly where to go in SciFi, I wager it could be done in about 20 to 30 minutes. Because so much of your time is spent wandering around, hoping to discover the next story beat. It's almost never clear where to go next. And when it is, you're not there long enough to really know the layout or commit it to memory, or at least when you do, you know, it's time to leave. Like, once you have the ship memorized, you move on to the next chapter, so all that info is kind of useless. Up until this point, you've always been pushing onwards. Like, there hasn't been a lot of backtracking or really having to learn your surroundings, because you're always going forward. But in SciFi, you have access to pretty much all the rooms you're ever going to have access to, right from the get-go, and it's more about you learning the layout and just going to the correct rooms. All in all, both Caveman and SciFi are winners in my book. Next up was Mech, and is perhaps the strangest. Our main character's name is Akira. He rides a motorcycle, he has psychic powers, they're not even trying to hide this one. On one hand, it's the silliest. It starts with this opening anime sing-along thing, complete with on-screen lyrics.
Go go ブリキだよ
今は昔のバブルにあ歪んの拳が天を救う生きよの魔人を倒すため光で火は灯せ熱い心が呼び覚むブリキだよ我とあり
Go go
But once you actually get into the plot, it's the most disturbing by far. It's about a government conspiracy to kidnap children so they can grind them up like in a blender to use that juice to power giant robots. It turns out that was the only way. So you fight back, you save the orphanage, you save the kids. Golly. I saved the cowboy for last because just look at him. He just looks like the coolest one. The looks are deceiving because it is not, in fact, the coolest one. It's probably my least favorite, actually, aside from Fighter, I guess. And I don't really know what they were going for. You stroll into a town only to learn that there's a gang of bandits that are going to come and invade and wreak havoc or whatever, and it's your job to stop them. You do this by setting up traps, but you don't actually set the traps up yourself. You just kind of walk around town looking for items that can be used as traps. Then you go back to the bar where everybody's hanging out and you ask one of the townspeople to set up the trap for you. How well you set up the town just determines how many people you need to fight at the end. And the fights aren't even that hard, so I reckon you could just sit back and do nothing and still come out of this okay. Sundown the Cowboy is still a cool character. I love this sprite, but he deserved better than this chapter. After completing all 7, an 8th opens up starring Oristed, which is the most like a traditional JRPG. For the first time, we have random battles, and holy cow, no. They were not missed, and introducing them this late in the game is just annoying. There's a princess, she gets kidnapped, and it's your job to save her. It sets up this stereotypical premise, only to undercut it by pulling the rug out from under you. Along the way, you accidentally murder the king, believing he's a demon, which turns you into a fugitive, but you tell yourself not to give up, that it's gonna be okay, because even if the whole world is against you, the princess is still out there, and she still loves you. So you slay the real demon, free the princess, and it turns out she has Stockholm Syndrome. She's heartbroken and fucking hates you. Then she kills herself. Everybody betray me. I fed up with this world. Orsted turns heel, becomes this evil, time-devouring demon monster, threatens to destroy everything everywhere all at once. So all the heroes from the other chapters are now teleported through time, and they need to stop him. That's how everything connects. They're just kind of teleported through time to stop this one evil monster. This whole chapter's cool. It's cool that it turns out that the traditional JRPG hero ends up being the big bad villain. I like how they set that up. This is a cool chapter. The Chrono Trigger influence, or maybe the other way around, is apparent here. Because when you think about it, Chrono Trigger is a game where there's these mostly self-contained stories throughout different times, and they all team up. They all come together to defeat the evil. Chrono Trigger retroactively makes Live Alive seem like a much lesser game, because it does the Live Alive premise in such a more clever, a more outstanding way. Just everything in that game feels so effortless. And then you play Live Alive and it's like, I don't know. They each had their own stories, which means that they're heroes, so heroes gotta beat the villain. Here's the villain. And they just kind of like put them all in the same world. It's kind of lame. I think it's kind of lame. At this point, you pick your protagonist. I chose Sundown because, hey, he deserved better. Interestingly, you can still pick Orsted, which puts you in a boss rush against all the other heroes. That's an amazing touch. You can still choose to play as the villain even after he becomes the villain. Though if you pick anyone else, it basically has you retread the same environments you just did as Orsted, complete with the random battles. And if you're expecting some grand finale, there really isn't one. You just kind of go through the same dungeon and then defeat Orsted. And that's it. That's Live Alive. It's like the whole time you're waiting. You're just waiting for these stories to converge into something really special. And then they just kind of don't. Everything is just kind of like its own loose thread. There are some neat ideas here for sure, but I don't think Live Alive really sticks the landing. It's just a game with a really good premise, but the execution isn't all there. Anyway, that's all I got. Never trust anyone who needs a haircut. Goodbye.